Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of Designer Head. And this episode we'll be talking about startups and hiring your first designer at a startup. So, I have to do the YouTube thing like everyone else. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you know every time I release a new video. If you like the video, please share. It helps immensely to grow this channel and make sure that other people can benefit from the content if you think that this content is beneficial. So in this specific episode, we'll be talking about how to hire your first designer, how to decide what kind of designer you need, or how to figure out what kind of designer you need, where to go look for them, and budgets, of course, because believe it or not, outside of just hiring and salaries, there are other budgets that come with hiring somebody like a designer. Of course, just like everyone else or any other field, everyone needs budgets, specifically any department. So let's not, waste too much time, and let's begin. Let's begin. In this episode, as I mentioned, I want to cover several things. One is, how do you identify what kind of designer you need? How do you find that designer? And budgets. Budgets are equally important to what you're doing. Yes, I am looking at my watch. It is here. A distraction. I'm human after all. So let's dive into it. Let's begin with who do you really need? And mind you, as much as some of you might think that you don't need a designer, but you really do. Here's the thing. Today, depending on what kind of product you have, B2B, B2B2C, B2C, B2AH, and whatnot, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there are people on the other side who will be using your product, whether it's going to be business or regular consumer, anything else really. Honestly, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, your product is being consumed by human beings. And human beings are consuming products based on their knowledge, experience with other products, and of course to evaluate and judge products based on other products that they like. And those could be Facebooks and Instagrams and Google and Uber, Lyft, and the list goes on. There's so many of them. So having said that, you really need designers. You can't avoid that. So what kind of designer do you really need? There's several ways of actually identifying what designers you need. It can be just you. If you're the only person in the company and you just started out, you just raised your seed funding for whatever product you're going to be building, you can sit down with yourself and look at your product and understand, okay, so my product needs a flow, my product needs interaction design, my product needs pretty pictures, my product needs nice UI, it needs a navigation, it needs so on and so forth. And if you don't know who your users are yet, and you need to do the research on that side, and you need to understand your users' mental mapping, understand their journey that will be happening through your product and so forth. Based on all this information that you're going to put together and make a list of all the things that you think your product needs right now, you can pretty simply understand what designer you need. If it's more heavily on the research side that you think will be beneficial for your product at this stage, then odds are you're looking for UX designer. If you need only one person that also has some chops in visual and UI and can also design some stuff on your app, SaaS platform, website, and so forth. So UX designer. If you don't think that you need research, God knows why, but let's assume you don't. Let's assume you had a freelancer, you had a contractor, or whoever that is, that you hired for a few months, that they worked with you, they did all the research. Now all you need is actually putting things together, making sure that your UI is pretty visually, people can use it, And also when things are being built, added as features, they can be tested, validated, and so forth. In that case, you need a product designer. In most cases, I would always recommend having a UX researcher and obviously a dedicated UI designer, definitely a director, manager, somebody to manage your team if you're willing to build a team and you have the budget for it. But at the stage, if you're at seed or A round, I would say you should be okay with just one or maybe two designers. And keep in mind the good ratio here that it seems like an industry standard, or at least a desire in a lot of companies, is a ratio of 1 designer to 5 engineers. So if you have 10 engineers, then you probably need 2 designers. If you have 20 engineers, you need 4 designers. Obviously, it doesn't work that way always. Typically, in many cases, especially startups, you'll have 2-3 designers servicing 25 some engineers. Keep in mind, I know it's about, well, why do we need so many designers? There are 2 designers, 3 designers can do these things. Sure, but it's about speed. If you have a massive machine of engineers constantly building and producing things and constantly adding features to your product, somebody needs to design those features. Somebody needs to validate them, test them, research them, and so forth. If all of this is not being done in time, then your incredible machine of engineering sits with their crossed hands and doing nothing, just burning your money, essentially. So think about it from that perspective, not necessarily from the perspective of, oh, I don't need 5 or 10 designers. My product is so simple and so small. It's only one app. I do need engineers, of course, because they need to do things, need to make sure everything is running. There's no bugs, there's security flaws and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I know many companies try to and like to work on in an agile environment. Everything is being done almost simultaneously and quickly and whatnot. At the end of the day, it's still a funnel. If you don't have designs ready, your engineers cannot do shit, like period. If they need to put a feature that requires an actual UI and an actual user experience, then you need designers to do that, because if you don't, then your designers are sitting and doing nothing, literally burning your money. Unless, of course, you completely ignore all of these rules and say, you know what, screw it, I'm just gonna do it myself, I'm gonna go design some feature, I'm gonna learn some Photoshop, put some stuff together, give it to my engineers, say, let's go. Put it in the app and see what users say. Sure, I know there's a mentality in the tech industry of build fast or release quickly and disrupt and learn from users. You'll be surprised that users today absolutely hate being the guinea pigs of your product. They want something that is already polished, they want something that is already working, they want something they don't have to learn, understand, and figure out how to use. They just want to use it. So, yes, definitely you have to test with your existing users, but a small portion of them. If you have 1 million users, then you'll testing with maybe 100 or a few hundred of them. Very controlled and small environment, not the entire pool, because once you do that, and let's say 70% of them didn't like what you just released, you just lost 700,000 users out of your 1 million. Do you really want to risk that? I doubt that. So yeah, think about it from that perspective. Now, when you do figure out exactly who you need to hire, and of course, when you do that process, definitely talk to your engineers. If you have engineers, they will tell you who they think they need. Also talk to your product department. If you have a product department, they will also definitely tell you who they think they need. And then look at it from a holistic perspective of, okay, what are we trending here? If you have engineers saying we need a product designer, you have a product team that says we need a product designer, then odds are you need a product designer. If you have engineers saying we need a UX designer, you have a product team that says we need a product designer, you sat down and did all this list and came up with the fact that you do need somebody on the research side, then odds are you need a UX designer. So do this math, do these lists, talk to people in your company, see what they say. Now, when it comes to actually putting together a job description and everything else, don't do the age-old mistake of so many companies, especially young ones. Go out there, go to Dr. Google and type in product designer, job application. When that happens, all you'll see is a list of other companies that create these job descriptions. Keep in mind, if you're looking at the big tech companies that everyone so desire to work at, and they're amazing, don't forget that those job descriptions are being written mostly by HR departments. HR departments very rarely understand actual design practice. They understand the concept of it. They understand the skill set you need in order to be a designer. They understand what kind of education they might need. They understand what kind of tools they should be using and so forth. And so those job descriptions are very dry, boring, and look like a check boxes. A list of things that you need to check off if you want to qualify for this position. This is why a lot of big companies, even big tech companies, lose a shit ton of talent on those applications. Why? Because people look at those lists and say, well, I don't do half the shit on this list, so I'm not gonna apply. Surprise that all of these lists typically are a wish list. It's not exactly what the company wants you to do or wants you to have. It's something that they desire for a candidate to have. But when they're interviewing, they're still gonna hire somebody who might lack certain parts or certain things or skills or I don't know, whatever else on that list. Why? Because let's face it, at the end of the day, we're still human beings and we're still hiring with our emotions. As much as a lot of companies say we don't, and as much as they try to avoid these kind of biases and emotions when they have one team interviewing people and another team that never met another person making the decision to hire the person or not, which I think is really bad practice, because then you're basically relying on the opinion of the people that interviewed, and then you kind of calculate the ratio or percentile of success rate of this candidate in your company or whatnot. I don't know the exact math behind that logic, but I don't think it's a good practice of hiring somebody by a committee that will never work with that person and never met that person. That's just incorrect, period. But regardless, seems like it's been working out for the big tech. Kudos to them. Let them keep doing that. In your position right now, what you need to do is to write a job description that actually yields talent. Not just a laundry list of checkboxes that you need to check off. Needs to be able to use Figma and Sketch and Vision and XD and Illustrator and Photoshop and this and that, and be able to use Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and all this type of shit. None of this matters. Talented designer can pick up a tool and figure out how to use it within probably a couple of weeks, if not a month. Couple of weeks, if not a week. Sometimes can go to a month. What I'm trying to say is, what you should be looking for is talent. You need to be looking for people who are passionate about what they do, who love what they do, people who will fight tooth and nail for what they believe in, people with a strong belief system, people who are empathetic, compassionate, inquisitive, curious naturally, love to ask questions, love to research, understand things from the deeper core of those things, and love solve problems, and love being among people and figure out how those people use products, not only others, but also yours. You need those people. Now, last year I was hiring for my current company and I had 2 open positions for junior designers, UX and product. The way I written the job description, I had 600 applications for 2 positions. It's a lot. It's really a lot. I didn't go through all 600, that's just insane. I don't have the time for it, but I did go through about 350, 370. My job description did not have anything mentioned about their experience. My job description did not have anything related to what kind of tools they need to use, or environments they need to know, or a very specific industry they're supposed to be coming from. my job description, we're essentially talking about what I'm looking for as a member of my team. Because at the end of the day, when you're thinking about it, none of this matters. And years of experience also don't really say much, because just because somebody has a lot of years of experience does not necessarily mean that they're talented, passionate, they love what they do. And it also does not necessarily mean that they're good at what they do. I met designers with decades of experience, yet I literally would tell them to change a career because they suck. Not because they just suck, because they just not in it. They just not, I don't feel like looking at their work, looking at what they do, talking to them, it feels like they fell into this profession because they couldn't find themselves anywhere else, and that seemed to be like an easy way into making money. And so they've been making that money from people who don't necessarily understand design. And so the quality of work is very poor. They don't understand any proper process. They don't understand how to do research. They don't understand how users behave. They don't understand any of these things. They know how to use Photoshop. They know how to use Sketch. They know how to use maybe InVision. They know how to use maybe other tools. But they lack any kind of talent. And so just because they've been doing that for 10 years does not indicate that they're talented and good at what they do. And at the same time, as equally, I've met designers that have zero experience whatsoever, but they are incredibly fucking talented. And if I had more positions on my team, I would hire them with my eyes closed. So trust me, years of experience are not the indication of talent and people being good at what they do. Don't include that. Just open up the gate for talented people. It might be somebody junior, might be somebody mid-level, depending on your salary range and depending who you really need. If you want somebody who can hit the ground running, then yeah, you need somebody with a few years of experience that they know what they're doing. Not necessarily 5, 10, 50, whatever that might be. And definitely don't put experience using specific tools, because that's definitely doesn't matter. There is a joke about some job post last year, yeah, or a few years ago, that was circulating among the design community about some company that posted a job description asking for somebody with 5 years of experience using Figma. At a time that Figma did not exist 5 years before that. Like, that's just, I don't have words for that. So these things don't matter. Now, let's move on to the fact that you figured out what you need, you know where to go and hire, you wrote your job description. Now, what do? Of course, you can do like everyone else. You can go to Indeed, LinkedIn, AngelList, Greenhouse, and whatnot, post the jobs and circulate it everywhere and start collecting those resumes and applications. But I would also recommend going a bit of a more personal route, which means go to Twitter. Surprisingly, Twitter is a platform where people do recruitment. Go to maybe Slack design channels. Google Slack design channels and you get a massive list of different channels depending on who you need: product design, UX design, visual design, UI design, and so forth. You'll find at least a dozen Slack channels where you can go. They have their own community guidelines how to post job descriptions, but they do post job descriptions there. Applications. So post it there, make it a bit more personal, allow designers to reach out to you directly through LinkedIn messages or Slack messages and so forth. Have the dialogue before, don't make it too kind of a cold. Now I guess the biggest, not the biggest, but a fairly big part of the job application and hiring is of course understanding your budget. Based on your budget, you can figure out if you need 2 junior designers, 1 mid-level designer, or 1 senior, 2 mid-level, and the list goes on. So you need to understand budgets. In terms of budgets, it's very, well, I guess what's the right word for that? We live in a very screwed up and weird times for that. Salaries varied from average, standard or national standard, if you can say that, in the United States. Probably you have the same thing in Europe. Design salaries and every other salary. So if you Google average, it will give you an average depending on the state where you live, experience, company size, and whatnot. That's a good basis to base your decision of how much you're willing or want to pay to a designer, but I would also add a little bit to it. I would add at least 5 to 10% on top of that average in order to be a bit more attractive. I would also consider benefits, different perks, bonuses, stock options, and things like that. That will make you attractive because you are competing today, especially today with a big resignation and such. You're competing against big tech companies, and big tech companies are paying a shit ton of money. And when I say a shit ton of money, consider this: a mid-level designer who national average salary might be in the vicinity of about $120,000 to $150,000 a year at such companies as Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn, Instagram, I don't know, Twitter, and whatnot. Those salaries, those numbers, not salaries, but numbers, suddenly become in the $250,000, $300,000, $400,000. Does that mean they actually pay that salary? No, they don't. They pay, give or take, the average of $150,000, maybe $170,000, maybe a little bit more. But then they have stock, they have bonuses and other perks and other benefits, and so in accumulation, it comes to be in a vicinity of $300,000 or $400,000. The number, it's so insane to people that they're attracted to these companies. Not because of their reputation, but not because they really love them, which a lot of people do, but because of the opportunity, the financial and growth opportunity at those companies. So when you're going out there and you're competing against those companies, consider that. Be aware of that. There's a lot of resources online where you can find different levels of designers, how much companies pay them, and for the engineers as well. Figure out how to compete, figure out how to make yourself stand out, and figure out how to make yourself attractive. And some tips that I can give you is consider stock options, consider bonuses, consider benefits. Make sure to tell the story about your product and what you're doing in such a way that people want to join your mission regardless of how much you're paying. Because that's the best people. People who join your company just for the sheer mission of the company and the product of the company, regardless of how much you pay them, these are the people you want on your team all the time, every day, running with you, going through fire and hell with you. So, in terms of those budgets, salary is not where it all stops. When you're hiring designers, equally for engineers, but more so for designers because engineers don't have research platforms, usability studies platforms, and so forth. All of these things are an extra cost. So when you hire your first designer, let's say you hire them for $150,000 a year, make sure to set aside some extra money for them to spend when they're in the company for such things as recruiting people for testing and studies, for user interviews, utilizing different platforms for quantitative studies or even qualitative studies and research. Data repositories, data synthesis platforms, where do you keep everything, how do you organize your data that you find, and so forth. All of this is an extra expense that you need to be ready for when you're hiring a designer. What kind of expense? Well, it's that time. If you're new here, then like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon because I will be publishing a video about budgeting for your research and UX needs in an organization and how to run all of that on a very tight budgets and yet not to restrict yourself too much and be successful in that. So follow me and follow the channel for announcement of that video. On that note, I hope that this was very helpful and informative and beneficial. If it is, as I mentioned, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, share the video if you think this is something useful to other people and other startup entrepreneurs that might benefit from this knowledge. If you have questions, if you have feedback or anything else down below under this video, please do leave a comment, feedback, review, whatever else. And I guess now is the time to say goodbye. Thank you for watching, thank you for your time, and as always, never stop learning.